Welcome to Ask the Experts. I'm not Brenda Vaccaro. I'm not. I'm not even Suzanne Plachette, Jack.
I think you should just sit there and look pretty. And
nice.
Brian and I will carry the show along with our special guest. I'll let you introduce our special guest.
I'm Jill Schlesinger. That's Jack Otter.
I'm Jack Otter, executive editor.
And we are joined by Brian Montopoli, senior political reporter for CBSNews.com, who's got a very long resume. Do I have to go through it all?
No, you can't read it. Let Brian do it.
We're good.
Is Megan holding her mouth like I sound so awful that it's just beyond her that she's letting me on the air today? Is that what's happening? All right, good.
We play hurt at MoneyWatch.
Exactly. Come on. I canceled TV tomorrow, but I'm not canceling this. We also have Alec Gutierrez, who's the senior market analyst of Automotive Insights for Kelley Blue Book. He provides analysis and market insight on the global and domestic events that shape the automotive industry. Gutierrez is also responsible for tracking, trending, and forecasting vehicle valuation trends for new and used cars, vehicle sales, and here's the big one, economic trends that impact the car market. So, guys, we're here to talk about rising oil and gas prices. So I just wrote down a few numbers. Let's start with a few numbers. Okay. So last May, crude oil topped out at $114 a barrel. The average price of a regular gallon of gas, $3.96. When we got to October, when we thought the entire world was falling apart, Europe was melting down, price of crude, $75. Average price of gas, $3.35. Today, we're at $106 a barrel. We're about $3.60 a gallon. Jack, what's going on?
Well, number one, the globe is using more gasoline. That's it. The global economy is improving. I think the number one gas user right now in terms of pushing the price up. America still by far is the biggest user of gas, but in terms of what's affecting the market is China. GM sold more cars in China last year than it sold in America, which is incredible. And of course, those are all new users. So when you hear about car sales in the US, it's mainly people buying a new car. In China, these are people who've never had a car before, so they're going to the pump for the first time. Now, you've also got Iran, and I think that is pushing up in the market. So I don't think it really affects the actual demand for gasoline, or I should say the supply is not being affected too much yet by the crisis in Iran, but it's spooking investors and sending prices a little bit higher on the exchanges.
And by the way, causing stocks to go down today, I think, because we see after that 13,000 glimmer yesterday for like
5 seconds,
15 minutes.
Yeah, not even about 10 seconds.
So the Dow was down 27 points today to 12,938. Nasdaq down 15 at 2933, and the S&P off 4.5 points at 1357. I think, Jack, what you're saying about Iran is really weighing on the marketplace right now. And it's, as you said, it's nothing that's happening with this second. Europe said we're sanctioning Iran, right? Iran says, you know what? How about we don't sell you oil? But nothing's really happened just yet, right?
Exactly. But, I mean, the potential end game is pretty scary. Obviously, Israel is on high alert. There's rumors that any day now you could see 100 Israeli jets up in the air dropping bombs on Iranian nuclear facilities. And where that leads, nobody knows. Frankly, I'm surprised that gas prices aren't higher, that we're not more in crisis mode right now.
Can I actually ask a question of the experts here? Why isn't the supply go up? I mean, why doesn't OPEC just release more oil?
Well, that's a good question. It's possible that OPEC is releasing a little bit more oil quietly without making a big deal out of it. I think that certainly for all the talk, oil-producing states don't really mind when the price of oil goes up. They don't like global recession because then demand goes down. But hey, if your country, if your entire kingdom relies on the sale of gas to survive, then hey, $4 a gallon doesn't look so bad. So that's probably the dynamic here.
And let's bring Alec Gutierrez in here, please. Alec, what's the deal? OPEC is looking for a sweet spot where they can make the most money?
Yeah, I think so. What's kind of interesting is that, as you mentioned just a moment ago, Jack, is that if you just look at the supply and demand fundamentals, specifically here in the U.S., you really don't see a lot of justification for the rise in oil prices, or for that matter, gas prices. Oil consumption in the U.S., or I'm sorry, gasoline consumption in the U.S. is down about 6% year over year. So with unemployment as high as it is, consumers are driving less overall. So I think a lot of it does go back to speculation in the market based on what could potentially occur with Iran. And granted, as you mentioned, in the worst case scenario, we don't know where that leads. But ultimately, yeah, it seems to be mostly driven by speculative traders.
And let's just bring that back for a second, because remember last year everybody was like bearing down on the speculators. And in fact, one of our colleagues, Dan, said yesterday, oh, it's all about the speculators. But that's not just the speculation. It's also people who have to worry about rising fuel costs, jet fuel, who have to protect themselves by buying futures.
Sure, and also, I mean, I think we should understand that the speculators are not evil. I mean, I don't like the idea that the global economy is weighed down because a couple of traders in the pits are pushing the prices up. But the fact is, it's their best guess as to where prices are headed in the future. Now, they overshoot on the upside and they overshoot on the downside, so you get more volatility. But I think the ultimate reality is that gas prices are going nowhere but up. There's only a finite amount in the ground. The global economy is growing. We've got all these people in the emerging markets using gasoline for the first time. And so in the long term, there is nothing we can do about it except for reduce our economy's reliance on gasoline, because gasoline prices have to go up.
All right, Mr. Politician, man. So back in 2008, I believe that there was some chatter about $4 gas is actually good because this would wean Americans off of their driving habit. And is there some speculation that this could actually be a good thing for perhaps the idea of building a green energy complex that Obama's been talking about?
Well, the Democrats don't want to say that publicly. I mean, Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy, is a guy before he was in the administration. He said specifically, we need to get U.S. gas prices up to Europe's level because that'll start encouraging people to have shorter commutes, to switch to more energy-efficient modes of transportation. Well, that may be true, and that may be what people are saying in, sort of the ivory towers, as Rick Santorum would put it. But in a political fight, to be able to say the president wants you to pay more for gasoline, that doesn't play well. And this is something that they're pushing really hard. We remember they were pushing it in 2008, drill baby drill at the convention. We're probably going to hear that again. I think the president is right to point out that the United States just doesn't have that much oil. I think it's 2% of the world's oil supply. And they've also noted that oil production in the U.S. is actually higher now than it was during the Bush administration. But the Republicans are looking for any edge they can find here. The economy seems to be looking up, so they're losing that argument a little bit. So what do they have? They have the president's trying to make you pay more for gas. Time to get him out of office.
And gas prices have a huge psychological effect. When people see gas prices go up, they feel worse about the economy. So it's a clever political move on the part of the Republicans. I would remind people that the fact that gas prices are 6 feet high on the highway doesn't mean that is really how important they are to your economic well-being. I mean, if your mortgage rate goes down a little bit, you'll save a lot more money than you will because gas is 40 cents higher.
I did a quick calculation. I said, okay, wait a second. Gas prices are up 12% from a year ago, and that means it probably costs you an extra $5 every time you fill up a 20-gallon tank. $260 a year.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not that big relative to a lot of the other things that affect us in our lives.
Payroll tax cut, for example, something that most people don't notice, is bigger. It's more.
Right, it's $1,000 basically for the average American.
Right.
So, well, let's talk a little bit. We're going to get back to gas for 1 second, but I do want to say we did get this announcement about Obama's corporate tax proposal, which is very exciting. All right, so boring. I know it. From a top rate of 35%. He wants to go down to 28%, 25% if you're a manufacturer. Jack, why do I care about this?
Well, to me, one of the most interesting things here is to compare this rate, this 35% rate that you hear so much about, with what companies actually pay. And you get a lot of different numbers. The Wall Street Journal today reports 32%. I saw a government analysis that showed it by industry. It varies immensely, but the average was 26%. Another way of looking at it is corporate taxes as a share of gross domestic product. And if you look at it over the past half century, the line is going straight down. We went from something like 30% to less than 2% of GDP now is the corporate tax rate. I think the best thing that could come out of this is it might even the playing field field a little bit between the big companies, the GEs, the Carnival Cruises, who have huge legions of accountants to lower their tax rate, while the small business guy, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have offshore shelters. So I think they're probably paying close to that 35%, while, as we know, GE will pay 2%, a negative tax rate. Carnival Cruise Line also in the single digits.
Brian, there's always been talk of this bipartisan agreement about this one thing. Well, we need an overhaul of the corporate tax code. We're getting anything on this or not? I hold you to this.
Well, certainly no one expects anything to happen in Congress this year, so I'd be skeptical. But, you know, we do have Mitt Romney and the other Republican candidates who want to lower the corporate tax rate. Now, they want to lower it by even more than President Obama wants to lower it. So we'll have to see what happens. But I think if they're going to come to some sort of agreement, this is a very strong opportunity. You know, I think it's a positive to lower the corporate tax rate. It's one of the few places where the Democrats can lower taxes in a way that they feel good about. The Republicans want to lower taxes so much in so many different areas that at least this is one opportunity where they can come together. They're certainly not going to come together on, say, lower taxes for the rich.
Right. And Jack, this is revenue neutral, and then I read something that it's $250 billion more over 10 years, which is...
Yeah, that I honestly don't know. And I think the devil in the details there is how many loopholes you get rid of. So yes, if you got rid of all loopholes and lowered the rate, probably it would be revenue positive. But that'll happen as soon as, I don't know, I'm out playing Jeremy Lin.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and this always happens. I mean, all of the Republican tax proposals, they say, we are going to have this economic growth when we cut taxes, and that'll just cover it. So it's revenue neutral.
Love that.
And you know, people talk about the Laffer curve and all this, but I mean, realistically, we have a lower tax rate now than we had, say, during the Clinton administration when we had surpluses. So I think it's hard to argue that if we cut... I think it helps to cut the corporate tax rate. I do. But I think to say that our economy will just get better if we cut taxes across the board, and we're gonna be able to suddenly plug our deficit because we've cut taxes, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Well, serious economists don't buy that. I mean, the fact is, Ted Kennedy would have been the biggest tax cutter in history if that were true, because he could have had a bigger government and lower taxes.
Right.
So obviously, by reducing taxes, you don't make gains. You probably did at 90% marginal rates,
right,
which was what Laffer is really talking about.
But you say, obviously, that's the entire Republican tax plan.
A good point.
Well,
Yeah.
you know what? Both of you guys are really pissing off all of the supply-siders right now. We've lost them all. They're not watching. Alec, I want to bring you into this conversation. When we talk about politics and we talk about even the politics of gasoline and all these things that are going on, are there things that the government can do, you know, even tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that make a difference when it comes to gas prices, oil prices? How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think ultimately the government, I think, is limited in what they can do to offset the influences of global markets and the impact of where fuel prices and oil prices are going to end up. In fact, what we've ended up seeing is the government's solution to try and counteract rising fuel prices is, one, as you folks were mentioning earlier, is to try and drive fuel prices up to try and incentivize manufacturers like GM, Chrysler, and the others to try and produce more fuel-efficient vehicles, try and lessen our demand for fuel. We also have things like CAFE, in which we're expected to see standards increase to, I think, 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2022, which is far and away well beyond where we're at today, where I think we still stand, I think, around 24 or 26 is the current requirement. Now, granted, in practice, it's expected that 54.5 miles per gallon isn't what's actually going to be out there. We might see something in the 40s because of some of the offsets that are going to be offered for trucks and SUVs. But ultimately, it's difficult for government to really sway consumer preference and consumer behavior. I mean, you look at the Chevrolet Volt, you look at the Nissan Leaf, some of these alternative energy vehicles that are pure electric in some sense, or in the case of the Volt, it does have a gas engine to kind of back it up and act as a generator of sorts. But ultimately, these are very, very expensive vehicles. The Volt stickers for $40,000, the Leaf stickers for $35,000, $36,000, and even considering the $7,500 tax credit, I mean, that's pretty far beyond what consumers are willing to pay. So I would say government's role as far as influencing fuel prices and how consumers react to that is somewhat limited and challenging.
I'll follow up with you and ask about, at the consumer level, what do you think the best way for people to go is? For instance, do you prefer hybrid or diesel?
That's a great question. And to be honest, there are, depending on your needs as a consumer, there really are a lot of different options. To be honest, right now, my wife and I are actually in the market to look at a new vehicle, and we've actually narrowed it down to the Jetta Sport Wagon. And one thing we're considering is looking at, as opposed to the traditional gas engine they offer, which gets something like 28 or 29 miles per gallon on the highway. We're actually looking at the TDI, the diesel. For one, it's a little bit sportier. It's got a nice turbo engine. It's got some increased torque. And it also gets 43 miles per gallon on the highway, which would add up to some pretty nice fuel savings overall. But you also have to consider that you're now paying for diesel, which in essence is 15 cents per gallon more than premium fuel. So that limits, I think, the impact of diesel in some respects, which is why we haven't seen more of an impact here in the U.S. It's obviously very, very popular out in Europe with some of their turbo diesel hatchbacks and smaller cars that they enjoy. But on the hybrid market, I would say the options are becoming better. Traditionally, they've been pretty expensive up front. That hybrid premium is pretty difficult to stomach up front for a lot of folks. You compare, say, a traditional Honda Civic versus the Honda Civic Hybrid, and you're looking at spending an additional $4,000 to $5,000 up front for what amounts to maybe 7 to 8 miles per gallon on the highway. And in the long run, depending on where gas is out, it doesn't always pan out. But looking ahead, there are some nice offerings coming out. I mean, you look at the Toyota Prius C, which is going to get 53 miles per gallon at only $18,000 or $19,000. And I think there are some nice hybrid offerings coming out that are more affordable to the average consumer.
Alex, you're new to the show, so you aren't aware that I use every opportunity in the show to plug my book that comes out in May, Worth It, Not Worth It. And in that, I argue, and I hope that you tell me I'm right, that if you live in the city and you're doing a lot of city driving, the hybrid has an advantage because the engine actually shuts down, whereas if you're on a highway, that's less important and the diesel starts to shine. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, if you look at diesel engines, the benefit really is on the highway. As I mentioned, that Jetta diesel gets 43 miles per gallon on the highway. And if you look at the city rating, it's somewhere in the mid to high 20s, versus that Prius, which gets 53 miles per gallon in the city and only, I think, in the mid to high 40s on the highway. So that's definitely a fair assertion, absolutely.
And Alec, do you think that gas prices are going to go higher and stay higher in this cycle or not?
Based on what we're looking at and kind of previous trends, even if we just look back to 2008 or last year, I think in the short term we could definitely see some sticker shock at the pump. I wouldn't be surprised to see fuel prices increase beyond $4 per gallon or maybe even up to $4.15 per gallon nationally. And we have to remember, here in California, we're already paying more than $4 per gallon. I just filled up the other day, and I am driving a Jetta, or not a Jetta, I'm sorry, I'm driving a Volkswagen GTI, which has a turbo engine, so I'm stuck with premium fuel, and I'm putting in $4.25, $4.30 per gallon already. My thought, though, is that while we may see a short-term spike here in spring and into early summer, I don't believe it's going to persist. If we look at all the projections that are out there, specifically by the EIA, they're projecting right now, their most recent forecast is that fuel prices will only exceed, on average, granted, taking into consideration there may be a spike here in the middle of the year, but on average we should see fuel prices anywhere between 5 to 10% above what we saw last year throughout the year. So while they may rise, they'll likely drop off in the long run.
Brian, is a short-term rise, if we go up a quarter even from here, is that enough to hurt Obama?
I mean, it doesn't help. I don't think it's as impactful as if the economy in general is struggling. I mean, I think that's a larger issue. I also wanted to mention one thing that's interesting about this notion of like a Chevy Volt is it becomes a culture war issue. Newt Gingrich was on the CBS This Morning, yesterday, and he said, the average person who buys a Chevy Volt, makes like $170,000 a year. And there's this real perception that sort of this is for sort of crunchy, East Coast limousine liberal types, these non-traditional cars, and I think that's actually going to be really interesting to watch how that plays out and how much the Republicans really push this idea that Obama's trying to get you, to drive these expensive, fancy cars, and instead of just trying to make your gas cost less.
As he said, you can't put a gun rack on a Prius.
Was that right?
Yeah. Although now some guy's on YouTube showing how he put a gun rack on his Prius.
Anyway, is that number right? I mean, Gingrich makes this stuff up all the time. Is that number right? Come on.
I don't know, but as Alex said, it's an expensive car, so.
All right.
I was amazed to see that the average household income of Porsche owners is like $75,000 or something. Whoa, hey.
So a lot of Boxsters there.
Yeah, maybe.
Not a lot of the real thing. Okay, so Alec, who is buying these? I mean, are we seeing much wealthier people buy these cars? And like you live in California, as you said. I mean, I don't know. I have a friend who's not very rich, and she bought a Prius just because she travels around LA all the time, and it made sense.
Yeah, I think, well, here in California, we're in a bit of a unique situation. I think in the past, most Prius drivers were commuters because actually Prius owners were able to get stickers which would give them unlimited carpool access even as a single driver. Today, the hybrid pass went away in the middle of 2011. But if you own a natural gas vehicle, you're still able to get that. So we're actually seeing interest in Civic natural gas, even some of these older Crown Vics that are coming out of police fleets powered by natural gas. You're seeing a lot of folks pick those up, which are alternative fuel, sure, but that's not what the buyers have in mind. They just want free access to the carpool lane.
That's
But
Incentives
in terms
work.
of, yeah, they really do. And I think the Chevrolet Volt is supposed to get carpool access beginning later this year. The Nissan Leaf already gets it. So that's a big thing here in California. Outside of California, the stats I've seen are some of the same you just mentioned, that Volt buyers and some of these other alternative fuel buyers are wealthier Americans. So I would say that the data I've seen does support what's been thrown out there, what you just mentioned.
My God, 170 grand. All right. So, Alec, when we look forward, tell us about, just because it's fun to do and you're here with us, what are the hot cars coming out right now?
Actually, there's a lot of great cars coming out, and really that have already come out in the last year. I think we've been touting the success of Hyundai and Kia and some of the really successful redesigns that they put out in the last year. The new Hyundai Elantra is phenomenal. Definitely compares relatively well to the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla. Even the domestics have some really strong vehicles that have come out and are expected to come out. The Chevrolet Cruze, which is their new compact offering, gets 40 miles per gallon on the highway. Actually outsold, was the leading selling compact through, I think, 3 to 6 months in 2011, and ended up finishing the year in the second position behind Corolla, who dominates that segment for the last 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
Later this year, you've got the Prius C, which I already mentioned, 53 miles per gallon. You've got the redesigned Ford Fusion, which will be available as a hybrid, and a plug-in hybrid, which should be pretty interesting. But ultimately, there's going to be a lot of fuel-efficient offerings available for a consumer with any sort of preference.
And at what price does gas have to be to really start to make sense to look at these hybrids? Is it $4 a gallon?
What we've seen in the past, we've conducted surveys of some of our website visitors, and we found that consumers don't start to alter their purchase behavior until gas prices reach between $3.75 and $4 per gallon, with $4 per gallon kind of really being that strong benchmark where consumers say, oh my gosh, I really got to get out of this SUV and get a Prius. So I think once gas prices reach that level, yeah, you'll see consumers start to aggressively pursue more fuel-efficient offerings.
And that's the level that's going to hurt our president if he's looking for re-election. I mean, that's got to be the big number. It's $4, and then you start to look back. Although, I mean, look, during his presidency, prices have been so volatile anyway. There's always something going on in the Middle East that blows things up. There's the Arab Spring. I mean, these things are real events. It's not, in 2008 when we were peaking out at $146 in oil, there was something different happening, which was the Chinese and Indians were just buying unbelievable amounts of oil to finance this huge engine of growth. Now, we're not at that level yet, but could you see something like this really derailing him? I can't, I don't know, I'm going to keep coming back to this because I'm trying to understand whether if someone has to pay an extra $400 a year, it's really going to cost an election.
There are things you can do, though. I mean, whether you're talking about a gas tax holiday, whether you're talking about the strategic oil reserve, I mean, you can do enough to put a Band-Aid on it, I think, unless things start to get really out of control, and we're talking about $5, $6. I also think, and this isn't an argument the president can make, but if you actually look at U.S. gas prices compared to, say, Europe, we have very low gas prices, even at $4 a gallon. Now, as I said, that's not an argument that's going to resonate in the swing states, but I do think it's worth keeping in mind that American gas prices are much lower. And the last thing I want to mention is this is part of a larger question of what sort of nation we're going to be in terms of transportation. Are we going to invest in more mass transit? I mean, and this is a really big fight that's going on between the Democrats and the Republicans where, stimulus money will go to Florida to build a high-speed train connecting two cities, and then Rick Scott, the governor, will say, I don't want the money because I don't want to build that. I mean, this is a fundamental fight that's going on about Democratic efforts, and they are trying to do this to move Americans away from driving traditional vehicles long distances on a daily basis and moving towards more mass transit, towards shorter commutes, and towards new forms of, powering your car. And that, to me, is the sort of the larger fight beyond just how gas prices go, is what we're going to be as a country and who we're going to be.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and it's kind of depressing. I mean, maglev trains were invented on Long Island at Stony Brook University, but it's the Chinese and the Japanese who really put those things into action. And I don't see it happening here. I mean, most people want to shut down Amtrak.
Oh. With all my Amtrak miles. Amtrak served me. What can I say?
They don't want to shut it down. They just don't want any government subsidies.
True.
They want it to be fully private, at least the Republicans.
True, and I'm not sure it could survive that way.
Maybe only in the Northeast Corridor.
Yeah, maybe
that would
Boston,
the problem
Washington.
is, that's the only thing that happens. All right, we're going to wrap it up because my voice can't take it unless you guys want to keep going. And I want to thank, first of all, Alec, we would love to have you back because we do love these car segments, right,
Absolutely,
Jack?
yeah.
Because I know nothing about cars. Jack knows a lot. But Alec Gutierrez, thank you so much for joining us from Kelley Blue Book. And Brian Montopoli, you've got a big night ahead of you, don't you?
I do. It's debate night.
You're so psyched. This is like a weatherman in a snowstorm for you, isn't it?
It'll be fun.
You're great. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Check out Brian writes all the time on CBSNews.com. Political Hot Sheet is you,
Yep.
right? You're Jack Otter.
I'm Jack Otter.
What are you doing
executive editor.
today?
Hanging out with Jill.
Totally.
I'll get you some cough drops.
Yeah, I need some tea and honey.
Okay.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week on Ask the Experts.